Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.
I took the job at Fort Halcyon because I needed the money and because guarding an empty building seemed like the kind of work where nothing could go wrong. After 2 years as a Navy corpsman and 8 months trying to make rent as a civilian, I'd learned that pride doesn't pay bills. The contract security company sold it as easy work. Overnight shifts at a decommissioned military hospital, solo patrol, log your rounds, keep vandals out. 12-hour nights, 4 nights a week, pay that made my previous grocery store stocking job look like volunteer work. I should have known better. Nothing about Fort Halcyon felt easy from the moment I drove through the outer gate. The hospital complex sprawled across what had once been the medical section of a much larger base, now mostly abandoned training grounds and empty barracks scheduled for demolition. The main building rose 4 stories, institutional gray concrete with rows of darkened windows that reflected the overcast October sky like dead eyes. Wings branched off at odd angles, the surgery wing to the east, the psychiatric ward to the north, and somewhere beneath it all, a sub-level I'd been told contained morgues and storage. A rusted chain-link fence enclosed the immediate grounds, topped with coils of wire that had gone orange with age. Floodlights mounted on tall poles ringed the perimeter, but Sergeant Mallory, my supervisor, had warned me during the drive that only about half of them still worked. "Generator keeps the essentials running," he'd said, not looking at me as he navigated the access road. Guard office, some of the corridor lighting and security cameras in the main halls. Don't count on anything else. Mallory was mid-50s, built like a fire hydrant, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent decades doing jobs he didn't want to talk about. He wore a faded security company windbreaker over what looked like old BDU pants. When I'd introduced myself at the site office in town, his handshake had been brief and his eye contact briefer. Now, as we pulled into the hospital's front circle, cracked asphalt, dead flower beds, a flagpole with no flag, he killed the engine and sat for a moment in silence. "You did intake medical work, right?" he asked. "That's what your resume said." "Corpsman, yeah," I said. "Mostly forward aid station stuff, some clinic work. Why?" "Just confirming." He opened his door. "Come on, I'll show you the office and the basics. You start solo tomorrow, but tonight you'll shadow the setup." The front entrance had been a grand affair once. Double glass doors under a concrete overhang, the words Fort Halcyon Medical Complex still barely visible in faded paint above. Now one door was chained shut, and the other required Mallory's key to open. It swung inward with a groan that echoed into the dark lobby beyond. Inside, the air smelled like dust, mildew, and something medicinal that hadn't quite faded despite years of disuse. Our footsteps sounded too loud on the scuffed linoleum. Emergency exit signs glowed dully at the ends of corridors that stretched into shadow. The lobby itself was stripped bare. No furniture, no fixtures, just mounting brackets on walls where signs and decorations had once hung. A reception desk sat empty, its surface marked with perfect rectangles of less faded paint where computers and phones had been. Mallory led me down the main corridor to the right, past darkened doorways that had once been administrative offices. My flashlight beam picked out details as we walked, peeling paint in long strips, water stains blooming across ceiling tiles, the occasional abandoned gurney pushed against a wall. Its wheels rusted into permanent stillness. "Guard office is here," Mallory said, unlocking a door marked security, authorized personnel only. This was the old MP station when the base was active. The office was small but functional. A desk held 3 monitors showing grainy feeds from security cameras, their timestamps glowing in the corner. A logbook sat open, pages filled with neat handwriting noting rounds and incidents, mostly no activity and perimeter check clear. A space heater sat unplugged in the corner. A coffee maker that looked like it dated to the Cold War perched on a filing cabinet. Radio equipment occupied a shelf, including a base unit and 2 handhelds in charging cradles. Cameras cover the main corridors, the lobby, and the exterior doors, Mallory explained, pointing to the monitors in sequence. They're motion activated to save power, so don't panic if a screen goes black. Just means nothing's moving in that zone. You log rounds every hour. Take one of the handhelds and walk the route I'll show you. Mark the time. Any observations, anything unusual? Unusual like what? I asked. Broken windows? Homeless people? Sure. Or anything that doesn't seem right. His voice flattened slightly. You were military. You know the feeling when something's off. I nodded, though his tone made something in my chest tighten. He showed me the generator room, a cramped space off the main hall that hummed with the diesel engine keeping minimal power flowing, and the route I'd be expected to walk each hour. Main corridors of each wing, check the exterior doors and verify the fence line is intact from the interior windows. He pointed out which stairwells were safe and which had been chained off due to structural concerns. Avoid the sub-level unless you have to check it, he said. It's on the route twice a shift, but it's a pain. Low ceilings, narrow tunnels. Morgue is down there, storage rooms, old service corridors. Noted, I said. We returned to the office as the last daylight faded outside. Mallory checked his watch just after 6 p.m. and began gathering his things. I assumed the orientation was over, that he'd leave me to read through the logs and familiarize myself with the monitors. Then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a laminated card, the kind you'd use for reference guides or emergency procedures. He slid it across the desk toward me without a word. I picked it up. The header read, Fort Halcyon, Night Security Protocol, Unofficial. Below that, a list of rules in typed text, numbered oddly, 1, 3, 5, 7, as if someone had edited out the even numbers. Rule 1. Do not acknowledge any overhead announcement that uses your rank or full name after 2340. We don't page individuals at night. Rule 3. Do not open any door marked with a red X on the psychiatric wing after dark, even if someone inside begs you. Rule 5. If you see ward lights flicker on in the east wing between 01 Zoar and 02 Sar, log power fluctuation and stay out of that wing. Rule 7. If you hear gurney wheels behind you but see no one when you turn, walk faster. Do not look back a second time. I read it twice, waiting for Mallory to crack a smile or explain that it was some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. He didn't. He just watched me with those flat, tired eyes. This is a joke? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Some kind of, I don't know, tradition to scare the new guy? Read them, Mallory said. Follow them. The cameras don't see everything that happens here, but something sees you. The way he said it, not with melodrama or a ghost story voice, but with the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used to explain the generator controls, made my skin prickle. Come on, I said. It's an empty hospital. Old buildings make noise. Wiring does weird things. I'm not arguing with you. He stood, zipping his windbreaker. You want the job, you follow protocol, official and unofficial, up to you. I looked down at the card again, at the oddly specific rules. Gurney wheels, red X doors, overhead announcements using my rank. Nobody here knew my rank. My paperwork with the security company listed me as Caleb Ortiz, with no military designation. Just a guy with a medical background and a clean record. How would an announcement use my rank if... I don't know, Mallory interrupted. And I don't ask. I just know people who don't follow the rules don't stay long. He headed for the door, then paused. First solo shift is tomorrow at 2000 hours. Read through the logs tonight if you want context. Don't stay past midnight. Why not? He didn't answer. The door shut behind him, and I heard his footsteps recede down the corridor, then the distant sound of the front entrance opening and closing. I sat alone in the small office, surrounded by the hum of old electronics and the faint smell of mildew. The monitors cycled through empty hallways, motion-activated cameras flicking on and off as dust motes drifted through camera fields of view. I looked at the laminated card again. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to pocket it and forget about it. But the part of me that had spent 2 years listening to my gut in field hospitals, the part that had learned when to take cover before the mortar rounds hit, told me to keep reading. I slipped the card into my jacket pocket and opened the logbook, flipping back through pages of previous shifts. Most entries were routine, but every few pages I found notes that made me pause. 2355 overhead page heard. Did not respond per protocol. No further activity. 0115, east wing lights observed on. Logged as a power fluctuation. Did not investigate. 0230, sound of movement in sub-level. Checked cameras, nothing visible. Remained at the station. The handwriting changed from entry to entry. Different guards, different shifts. But the tone was always the same. Controlled, brief. As if the writers had forced themselves not to elaborate. I checked my watch, just after 7. 5 hours until the cutoff Mallory had mentioned. The office suddenly felt smaller, the darkness in the corridors outside more absolute. I told myself it was an old building, that every security job had its quirks and superstitions, and that I'd laugh about this in a week. But I didn't throw the card away. And when the building settled with a long groaning creak that seemed to come from deep in its bones, I found myself glancing at the monitors more frequently, watching the empty hallways for movement that never came. Not that night, anyway. My first solo shift started at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. I arrived early, parked in the circle out front, and sat in my car for a few minutes staring at the dark hospital. A cold front had moved in, bringing low clouds and a persistent wind that made the chain-link fence rattle. The working floodlights cast harsh pools of white across the building's facade, leaving the upper windows in deep shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was watching me, waiting to see if I'd actually go inside. I forced myself out of the car and through the front entrance. The lobby was exactly as I'd left it the previous night. Empty, silent, smelling of old concrete and decay. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the security office and clocked in, logging the start of my shift in the book. 20:05. Shift start. C Ortiz, all exterior secure. The monitors showed the same grainy feeds. I made myself coffee with the ancient machine, surprised when it actually worked, and spent the first hour reading through more of the old logs. There were gaps, days where no one had signed in, followed by notes from Mallory explaining that the contract had been briefly suspended due to staffing difficulties. I found one entry from 4 months ago that just read, Guard Stevens, no longer assigned to site, no explanation, no forwarding information. At 9, I did my first round. I took one of the radio handhelds, clicked on my heavy mag light, and walked the prescribed route. Main corridor to the east wing, the surgery section, where operating theaters sat dark behind small rectangular windows in double doors. My flashlight beam caught stainless steel tables, overhead surgical lamps hanging like mechanical spiders, trays of instruments left behind when the hospital closed. Everything was covered in dust thick enough to show my breath disturbing it. The psychiatric wing to the north was worse. The corridor narrowed and the doors here were heavier, institutional gray with small wire-reinforced windows. Some had clipboards still hanging beside them, patient names long faded. I walked slowly, playing my light over each door, looking for the red X that Rule 3 had mentioned. I found it at the end of the hall, a heavy door with a small window, and across its center a thick red X spray-painted in strokes that had dripped before drying. Below it, someone had scrawled "No entry" in black marker. The door had a sliding bolt lock, currently thrown. A faded sign read "Isolation Room 4." I stood there for a moment, my light steady on that red X, and felt an irrational urge to check if the door was truly locked, to test it. Instead, I logged the time and moved on. The rest of the route was uneventful. I checked the West Wing, administrative offices and old labs, and then descended the stairwell to the sub-level. Mallory had been right, it was claustrophobic down there. The ceilings were lower, the corridors narrower, the air colder and heavy with the smell of earth and concrete. The morgue was behind a set of double doors marked with biohazard symbols that had faded to pale yellow. I didn't open them. Storage rooms branched off the main tunnel, their doors labeled with codes I didn't understand. I completed the circuit and returned to the office, logging the round at 22:10. Nothing unusual. No movement, no sounds except the wind outside and the building's occasional groans as it settled. I felt myself relax slightly. Maybe this would be exactly as boring as advertised. At 11:30, I was halfway through a protein bar and skimming an old incident report. Something about a patient transfer gone wrong in 2003 when the overhead PA system crackled to life. The sound made me jump, my chair scraping backward. I stared at the ceiling speaker mounted in the corner of the office, a dusty metal grill that I'd barely noticed before. A woman's voice emerged from the static, calm and professional, the kind of voice you'd hear in any hospital corridor. "Corman Ortiz, report towards C, Isolation Room 4. Immediate assistance required." My blood went cold. Corman, not guard, not security. My old rank, the one I'd held in the Navy, the one that wasn't on any of my current paperwork. The voice continued, maddeningly composed. "Corman Ortiz, report towards C, Isolation Room 4. Patient status critical. Immediate assistance required." I shot to my feet, instinct overriding thought. Someone was hurt. Someone needed help. That's what immediate assistance meant. What every fiber of my training demanded I respond to. My hand was on the office door when I remembered the laminated card. I pulled it from my pocket with shaking hands and read Rule 1 again. "Do not acknowledge any overhead announcement that uses your rank or full name after 2340. We don't page individuals at night." I checked the clock on the wall, 2347. The PA hissed again, more insistent now. "Corman Ortiz, this is not a drill. Patient in Isolation Room 4 requires immediate medical intervention. You are the on-call responder." The words, "not a drill," hit something deep in my chest, a muscle memory from a dozen emergencies where seconds mattered. I'd lost a patient once, a Marine who'd bled out while I fumbled with a tourniquet, my hands shaking, the sand getting into everything. The guilt still woke me up some nights. This felt like a chance to do it right, not to fail this time. I was 3 steps into the corridor before I forced myself to stop. The announcement was using my rank. After 2340, the rules said not to acknowledge it. But what I, The1, was actually hurt? What if this were a real emergency, and I stood by and did nothing because of some superstitious bullshit? My hand trembled as I lifted the radio and keyed the mic. "Mallory, this is Ortiz. Are you there?" Static. Then faintly, his voice, annoyed. "I'm off duty, Ortiz. What's wrong? Did you just page me over the PA?" "PA's been offline for 6 years. What are you talking about?" The speaker crackled again, and this time the voice had an edge of urgency. "Patient status, unstable. Corman Ortiz, you can save him. Report immediately." I'm hearing announcements, I said into the radio, my voice tight. Calling me by rank, telling me to report to Ward C. The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Then Mallory's voice came back, hard and clear. Do not respond. Stay in the office. Do you understand me? Stay in the office. But what if... It's not real. Mallory's voice rose slightly, the first time I'd heard emotion from him. There is no patient. There hasn't been a patient in that building for 8 years. Do not go to Ward C. The PA went silent mid-word, as if someone had flipped a switch. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the voice had been. A silence so complete it felt like the building was holding its breath. I stood in the corridor, my heart hammering, the radio clutched in one hand and my flashlight in the other. The beam shook as my hand trembled. Ortiz. Mallory's voice was quieter now. You still there? Yeah, I managed. Did you go to Ward C? No, I stayed. Good. Lock the office door. Finish your shift. We'll talk tomorrow. The radio went dead. I returned to the office and did as he said, throwing the bolt on the door and sitting down heavily, in the chair. The monitors showed empty corridors, the cameras cycling through their feeds. I pulled up the footage from the past 10 minutes and watched myself standing in the hallway, radio to my ear. There was no audio of the PA announcement. The system had recorded nothing but ambient silence and my one-sided conversation. But I'd heard it clear as day. Heard my rank, heard the room number, heard the urgency in that calm, professional voice. I looked at the laminated card again, at Rule 1, and felt the first real crack in my rational worldview. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. I did my rounds mechanically, avoiding Ward C entirely, my flashlight beam jumping at every shadow. Nothing else happened. No more announcements, no sounds except the wind and the building's normal settling. But when I left at 8 a.m., as the sun rose over the flat training grounds beyond the fence, I found myself checking the rearview mirror compulsively as I drove away, half expecting to see someone standing in one of the hospital windows watching me leave. The building remained dark and still. It was 3 days before I worked up the nerve to return. On my second week, the company assigned a second inard to the night shift. His name was Brandon Hale, early 30s, former military police with the kind of swagger that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't handle with attitude and procedure. He arrived for his first shift in a tactical vest that seemed like overkill for guarding an empty building, carrying a coffee the size of a small bucket and wearing a body camera clipped to his chest. Company policy now, he explained when he saw me looking at the camera. After that guy Stevens disappeared, they want video documentation of rounds. Covers their ass, covers ours. We shook hands and I tried to size him up. He had the build of someone who still hit the gym regularly, a square jaw, and the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. When Mallory introduced us and went through the basic orientation, Brandon interrupted frequently with comments like standard procedure, and yeah, we did it the same way at Fort Bragg. When Mallory pulled out the laminated card and slid it across the desk, Brandon picked it up, skimmed it, and laughed. "Oh, this is good," he said. "The ghost rules. Every old building has these. Guys get spooked by their own shadows and start inventing protocols." He looked at me. "You don't actually follow this stuff, do you?" I kept my voice neutral. "I follow all the protocols I'm given." "It's just hazing," Brandon said, dropping the card on the desk. "Bad wiring makes the PA glitch. Doors expand and contract with temperature changes and old buildings creak. You hear weird stuff because you expect to. It's confirmation bias." Mallory's expression didn't change. "You're welcome to your opinion. But while you're on my site, you follow the rules. All of them." Brandon shrugged. Sure, I'll play along." But I could tell he didn't mean it. The first few nights with Brandon were tense. We split the rounds, one person walking, one monitoring the office, and he treated the whole thing like a joke. He'd key the radio during my rounds with fake emergency calls. "Guard Ortiz, please report to the basement. We have reports of spooky ghosts." That kind of thing. I didn't laugh. He also started testing the boundaries. On the third night, he insisted on checking the red X door in the psychiatric wing, the one from Rule 3. "I want to see this infamous door," he said. "Maybe there's a homeless guy squatting in there and your homeless guy is squatting Ek." I tried to dissuade him, but he brushed me off. We walked the psych wing together, our flashlights cutting through the dark. When we reached the end of the corridor, Brandon stopped in front of the heavy door with its red X and scrawled warnings. "This is it?" He sounded disappointed. "Just an old isolation room." "The rule says don't open it after dark," I reminded him. "The rule is bullshit," Brandon said. But he didn't open it that night. He just took a photo with his phone and moved on. The escalation came on a Friday, 2 weeks into my time at Fort Halcyon. The wind was up again, making the fence sing and the building groan. We split rounds at midnight. I took the surgery wing and the east side. Brandon took the psychiatric wing and the administrative offices. As I walked through the operating theaters, my flashlight playing over rusted instrument trays and dust-covered equipment, I heard the sound from Rule 7 for the first time. Gurney wheels. The squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum, rhythmic and steady, was coming from somewhere behind me. I stopped walking. The sound stopped. I started again, and after a few seconds, the squeaking resumed, matching my pace, staying just far enough back that I couldn't pinpoint the source. My skin crawled. I forced myself to turn around slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the corridor behind me. Nothing. Just an empty hallway, dusty floor, closed doors. The sound had stopped the moment I turned. I waited. My breath loud in my ears, the flashlight beam rock steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Then the squeaking started again, from the same direction, as if whatever was making the sound had waited patiently for me to turn back around. Rule 7 came back to me. If you hear gurney wheels behind you but see no one when you turn, walk faster. Do not look back a second time. I walked faster. The squeaking accelerated to match. My hands clenched on the flashlight, every instinct screaming at me to turn and confront whatever was following me, to shine the light and prove it was just a loose door or a draft moving something. But I didn't look back a second time. I just walked faster and faster until I reached the stairwell and took the steps to it, a time back to the main corridor. The squeaking stopped at the threshold of the stairwell as if it couldn't or wouldn't follow me there. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Brandon, you copy?" "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" "Just checking in. You good?" "I'm fine." "Hey, actually, I found something you'll appreciate." His tone made my stomach sink. "What?" "I'm at your spooky door, the one with the red X. And Caleb, someone is knocking from inside." My blood turned to ice. "Don't open it." "Relax, I'm just going to check it out." "Brandon, that's against the rules." "Your rules," he corrected, "not mine." Through the radio, I heard the sound he was describing, a rhythmic banging, metal on metal, hollow and resonant. And then a voice muffled by the door, ragged and desperate. "Please, help me, the door's stuck. I can't breathe in here, please." "Brandon, do not open that door." I started running toward the psychiatric wing. "That's a direct order. We're not supposed to open it." "If there's someone locked in here, we have a legal obligation to get them out," Brandon said, his voice maddeningly calm. "What if it's a squatter who accidentally got locked in? What if they're actually suffocating?" The knocking intensified. The voice changed slightly, the pitch shifting. "Cold. So cold in here. Please, please help." I was sprinting now, my boots pounding on linoleum, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Through the radio, I heard Brandon mutter, Okay, let's take a look. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding back. Brandon, don't! The audio from his body camera crackled through the radio, and I heard his sharp intake of breath. What the? Brandon's voice suddenly uncertain. What is that? Then static. Pure hissing static that drowned out everything else. Brandon! I shouted into the radio. Brandon, respond! Nothing. I reached the psychiatric wing and ran down the corridor, my lungs burning. The red X door came into view at the end of the hall, and my flashlight beam caught it. The door was closed. The bolt was thrown. But Brandon's radio lay on the floor just in front of it, the earpiece still attached, the device warm when I picked it up. No sign of Brandon, no footprints in the dust beyond where he'd been standing. No disturbed floor, no scuff marks, nothing. Just the radio, and beside the door on the wall next to the red X, a new mark. A rust-colored smear roughly the width of a hand, fingers dragging downward toward the floor. The pattern was unmistakable. 4 parallel lines, like someone had clawed at the wall while being pulled down, or pulled through. I stared at the door, my heart hammering. The small wire-reinforced window was dark. I stepped closer, raised my flashlight to peer inside. In the half-second before I thought better of it and pulled back, I saw something in that narrow beam of light. The room beyond was not small, as isolation rooms should be. It stretched back into impossible darkness far deeper than the building's floor plan would allow. And in that darkness, shapes moved. Not walking, but gliding, hunched forms that turned toward the light with a synchronized motion that was utterly inhuman. I stumbled backward, my flashlight falling from my grip and rolling across the floor. By the time I retrieved it and looked again, the window showed only black. The door remained closed and locked. Brandon Hale was gone. They called it a walk-off. That's what the report said when the regional supervisor came by 3 days later. Brandon Hale had abandoned his post without notice, left his equipment behind, and would be terminated for breach of contract. His emergency contact, an ex-wife in North Carolina, said she hadn't heard from him in months and wasn't surprised he'd flaked on another job. I told them what I'd seen. I described the knocking, the voice, the moment his radio cut to static. I showed them the rust-colored smear on the wall, though by the time we returned to the psychiatric wing with the supervisor, it had faded to almost nothing. Just a faint discoloration that could have been old water damage. The supervisor, a tired woman in her 50s named Mrs. Chen, listened patiently, made notes, and then filed the report as employee abandonment. "Old buildings play tricks," she said, in the same tone people had been using with me since I started. "Acoustics are strange, radios glitch. He probably got spooked and bailed. Happens more than you'd think." But she assigned me solo shifts after that. No more partners. I should have quit. Every rational part of me screamed to walk away, to find another job, to never set foot in Fort Halcyon again. But I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness, or the paycheck, or the part of me that needed to understand what had happened to Brandon, or maybe on some level the hospital had already decided I wasn't allowed to leave. I started investigating during the quiet hours between rounds when the night stretched long and empty. The hospital had been abandoned in haste, that much was clear. Offices still contained filing cabinets, many unlocked or easy to force open. Patient records had been removed, but administrative documents remained: duty rosters, maintenance logs, and incident reports. In the third-floor administrative wing, in a cabinet marked Facility Operations, 2001-2008, I found the first real clues. Tucked behind folders of mundane paperwork, supply orders, shift schedules, HVAC maintenance, were incident reports that had been stamped internal review only in red ink. They described events that the official records never mentioned. November 2003, multiple night shift staff reported hearing command announcements over PA system that were not initiated by any authorized personnel. Announcements used specific names and ranks. System was inspected and found to be non-function. The system January 2004. Night nurse reported patient in Ward C calling for help. Upon investigation, Ward C was confirmed empty and locked per nightly protocol. Nurse placed on administrative leave for a psychological evaluation. March 2004. 2 orderlies reported seeing gurneys moving in sub-level corridors. Security footage reviewed. No movement detected. Staff counseled about fatigue-related hallucinations. The reports grew more frequent and more disturbing through 2005 and 2006. By 2007, the language changed. Someone, probably whoever had been signing off on these reports, had stopped trying to explain things away. August 2007. Recommend implementation of informal night protocols per nursing staff suggestions. Staff report protocols increase compliance and reduce incidents. Suggest discretionary adoption. Clipped to that report was a handwritten note on hospital stationery. Whatever's wrong with this building gets worse when we ignore it. The old staff knew. Maybe we should listen. I photocopied everything I could and stuffed the papers into my bag. In the deserted chapel, a small room off the main corridor with rows of dusty pews and a simple altar, I found something even more valuable. The floorboards near the front were warped, and when I knelt to examine them, one came loose easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside was a spiral notebook, its cover warped with water damage, labeled in fading pen, Miller, Night Charge Nurse, Private. I sat in a pew and read by flashlight. Nurse Miller had worked at Fort Halcyon from 2004 until the hospital closed. Her notebook was part journal, part survival guide. The early entries described the same phenomena I'd been experiencing. PA announcements that shouldn't happen, sounds in empty rooms, the growing conviction that the hospital was aware of its staff in a way that had nothing to do with security cameras. But the later entries were instructions, rules written in increasingly frantic handwriting. Never respond to announcements after lights out. It learns your voice. It learns to call you. The room with the red X was where it started, where patient 0 became patient nothing. Don't open it. Don't ever open it. When the ward lights come on in the East Wing during the dead hours, it's doing rounds. Checking beds. If you're there, it might decide you're supposed to be in one. The gurney sounds. They're not gurneys, or they are, but nothing human is pushing them. Keep walking. It respects forward motion. Stopping makes you a patient. One entry dated a week before the hospital closure read, "We're not guards here. We're not even staff anymore. We're witnesses. It needs us to see, to acknowledge, to follow its rules. As long as we do, it lets us leave." But Stevens went to Ward C. Garcia opened the red door. Kimball stayed in the East Wing during Code Black. They're still here. I can feel them. If you're reading this, your working nights, I'm sorry. Follow the rules we made. They're all that kept us sane. They're all that kept us alive. The final entry was just 2 words, underlined 3 times. Don't stay. I sat in that chapel for a long time, the notebook open on my lap, my flashlight beam steady on those final words. The hospital had a history, a pattern, and everyone who'd ignored that pattern had paid for it. I started noticing other details on my rounds, things I'd overlooked before. In Ward C, a patient assignment board still hung on the wall near the nurses' station, names faded but visible. Someone had recently, within days, added our still new name at the bottom in fresh black marker. Ortiz. In the main corridor, faint scratches marked the walls at shoulder height, running parallel to the floor for dozens of feet. When I examined them closely, they matched the width of gurney handles, as if the gurneys had been pushed through recently despite their wheels being rusted solid. Doors I'd checked and found locked on one round would be standing slightly ajar on the next. Cold air seeping out even though the building's heat had been off for years. And throughout it all, I felt watched. Not by cameras, I knew where those were, but by something patient and curious, something that had learned over years how staff behaved, what they feared, what rules they'd follow. On my rounds, I began talking to myself, narrating my actions like I was filing a report. Checking East Wing, all doors secure, proceeding to the stairwell. It helped somehow to put words to the fear. I didn't know it then, but the hospital was listening. And it was learning my voice. On a gray morning in late November, as I was logging the end of my shift and preparing to leave, Sergeant Mallory arrived early. He looked worse than usual, unshaven, shadows under his eyes, the lines in his face deeper. He locked the office door behind him and sat down heavily across from me. "We need to talk," he said. I closed the logbook. "About Brandon?" "About all of it." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You've been digging. I've seen the photocopies in your bag, the files you've been reading." I tensed, ready to defend myself, but he waved it off. "I don't blame you. I'd do the same thing." He leaned back in the chair, which creaked under his weight. "You want to know what this place is? Why the rules exist? Why people vanish?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I do." Mallory stared at the monitors for a long moment, watching the empty corridors cycle through their camera feeds. When he spoke, his voice was tired and distant. "I was stationed here in 2007. Military police detachment assigned to provide security when the hospital was still operational. It was already winding down. Most patients had been transferred. Only the psych ward was still active, and even that was on reduced staff. My squad pulled night shifts, mainly to keep an eye on things after the first round of incidents. What kind of incidents? Missing patients, staff who called in claiming they were sick but sounded wrong, flat voices, wrong word choices like someone reading a script, equipment moving on its own, PA system announcing codes that weren't in any manual. He met my eyes. "The same shit you've been dealing with." "What happened?" "The psychiatric wing was the epicenter. They'd been running some kind of experimental treatment program there, classified above my clearance, for soldiers with severe trauma and what the reports called anomalous perceptual experiences. Guys who'd seen things downrange that they couldn't rationalize. PTSD cases that went beyond normal treatment protocols. I thought of the redacted files I'd found, the mentions of Project Night Ward. Mallory continued. "One night in March, during a storm, something happened in the isolation ward. I don't know the details, it's still classified, but 4 patients and 2 staff members vanished. Not escaped. Vanished. Their belongings were still in their rooms. Security footage showed them entering the ward for evening rounds but not leaving. We searched for 3 days. Never found a trace." "Jesus," I muttered. "The Army sealed the psych wing after that. Closed the entire hospital within 6 months. Official reason was budget cuts and consolidation. The official who'd been on staff during the incident was reassigned or discharged. Most of us signed NDAs." He smiled bitterly. "Not that we needed them. Who'd believe us?" "But you came back," I said. "You took a job with the security company guarding this place." "I never left," Mallory said quietly. "Not really. After discharge, I tried working normal jobs, couldn't do it. I'd wake up at night thinking I heard announcements, see hospital corridors when I closed my eyes, so I came back. Figured if I was going to be haunted by this place, might as well get paid for it." The admission hung in the air between us. "What is it?" I asked. What's in this building? I don't know, none of us did, but the old staff, the ones who'd worked here for years, they'd developed workarounds, informal protocols, ways to coexist with it. He nodded toward the laminated card lying on the desk. Those rules didn't come from command. They came from nurses, orderlies, night shift staff who figured out what kept them safe. And Stevens, Garcia, the others who disappeared, broke the rules, every single one. Stevens went to Ward C when something called him. Garcia opened the red door. Kimball stayed in the East Wing during a code black. He looked at me steadily. You felt it pull at you, didn't you? When the PA called you by rank. The instinct to respond, to help. That's what it does. It uses who you were, who you are, against you. I nodded slowly, remembering the desperate need I'd felt to answer that call, to be a corpsman again. Why doesn't it just take everyone? I asked. Why the rules, the games? Because it's not just taking, Mallory said. It's processing. That's what the old staff thought. The hospital is still trying to do its job, intake, treatment, classification. But something went wrong in 2007, something that blurred the lines between patient and staff, between living and... He trailed off. The rules help it categorize you. As long as you follow them, you're staff, you're an observer, you're outside the system, but if you break them, you become something it can admit. The word hung in the air. Admit. Like a patient. Mallory reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn key on a chain. He slid it across the desk. Sub-Level 1, Storage Room 7, that's where they kept the physical records for Project Night Ward before the purge. Most of it's been destroyed, but there are files in a locked cabinet. If you really want to understand what happened here, that's where you'll find it. I picked up the key. Why are you telling me this? Because you're still asking questions. Most people either quit or go numb. You're trying to figure it out. He stood, preparing to leave. But I need you to understand something, Ortiz. This isn't a problem you can solve. It's not a fight you can win. The only way to survive is to work around it. Follow the rules. Don't try to fix it or confront it or save anyone. Like Brandon, I said quietly. Mallory's expression softened. Yeah, like Brandon. He thought he could challenge it. Prove it wasn't real. The hospital doesn't care about skepticism. It just sees non-compliance. He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the lock. There's one more rule that's not on the card. I learned it from the old nursing supervisor before she transferred out. I waited. If you ever hear a code black called between 2 and 3 a.m., you lie down wherever you are. Close your eyes and stay absolutely still. Don't move until it's over. What's code black? It's when the hospital does rounds, not the staff, the hospital itself, checking beds, counting patients, verifying who's supposed to be there. His eyes were distant. If you're moving during a code black, it thinks you're a patient who's out of bed, and it puts you back where you belong. In a bed? In the system. He opened the door. I've survived 3 code blacks by lying still and keeping my eyes closed. You hear things during it. Wheels, voices, doors opening and closing. You feel things moving around you. But if you stay still and let it pass, it logs you as compliant and moves on. He left me alone with that image, the door clicking shut behind him. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the monitors showing the empty sub-level corridors. I knew I was going to use it. I'd come too far, learned too much to turn back now. But Mallory's words echoed in my mind. This isn't a fight you can win. Maybe not. But I could at least try to understand what I was up against. That night during my midnight rounds, I took the key to sub-level 1. The sub-level was worse at night. During my first visits, I'd moved through it quickly, flashlight beam steady, focusing only on the route and the checkpoint doors I needed to verify. Now, descending the stairwell with Mallory's key clutched in my hand, I felt the weight of the hospital pressing down from above. 4 stories of concrete and steel. Millions of pounds of structure filled with years of pain and whatever had grown in the spaces between. The air was colder here and damper. My breath misted in the flashlight beam. The corridor walls were bare concrete, painted industrial gray, marked with faded stenciled numbers and directional arrows. Overhead pipes dripped condensation that had nothing to do with any active water system. Storage room 7 was at the far end of the main tunnel, past the morgue and the old pharmacy lockup. The door was heavy steel marked authorized personnel only, with a serious-looking lock that seemed newer than the rest of the building's hardware. Mallory's key turned smoothly. Inside, metal shelving units held bankers' boxes, old equipment, and stacks of bundled documents. Most of it was routine. Supply inventories, maintenance schedules, personnel files for staff who'd long since moved on. But in the back corner, behind a shelf that I had to move, I found what Mallory had sent me for. A locked filing cabinet with a small placard reading Project Night Ward, Medical Records. The same key opened it. The files inside were thin. Most of the program's documentation had clearly been removed, but what remained painted a disturbing picture. Project Night Ward had been a classified study started in 2002 examining soldiers who reported persistent anomalous experiences after combat deployment. Not PTSD, or not just PTSD, but something the reports called perceptual dysregulation with external manifestation. In plain language, soldiers who saw things, heard things, experienced things that weren't supposed to be real. And somehow those experiences affected the people around them. One file belonged to a Sergeant Marcus Vale, admitted in January 2007. The intake form described persistent auditory phenomena following deployment to Iraq, hearing commands from officers who weren't present, voices using proper military protocol and accurate information that Vale shouldn't have known. When medical staff tried to treat him as delusional, the phenomena began affecting them too. Nurses heard pages for Sergeant Vale over intercoms that weren't connected. Orders appeared in his chart that no doctor had written. The final note in his file, dated March 14, 2007, read, "Patient transferred to isolation room per protocol. Recommend immediate cessation of group exposure, phenomena demonstrating adaptive behavior." Below that, someone had scrawled in pen, "It's learning from him." There were 6 other files like Vale's, each describing similar patterns, patients whose symptoms somehow infected the environment around them, creating localized reality distortions that persisted even when the patients were sedated or isolated. The program had been trying to contain them, study them, maybe even weaponize them. And then, in March 2007, something had gone catastrophically wrong. The incident report was heavily redacted, but the outline was clear. During a severe thunderstorm, the isolation ward experienced a containment failure. All 7 Project Night Ward patients vanished, along with 2 staff members who'd been conducting evening rounds. The report speculated about cascade effects and environmental integration, phrases that meant nothing and everything. What wasn't redacted was the recommendation: immediate facility closure and decommissioning. Site demonstrates persistent anomalous properties, the site appendant of patient presence. Recommend long-term monitoring and restricted access. They'd closed the hospital, but they hadn't fixed it, because the patients, whatever they'd become, were still here. I sat on the cold concrete floor of Storage Room 7, surrounded by files that proved I wasn't crazy, that every inexplicable thing I'd witnessed had a basis in something real and terrible. The hospital had been infected by 7 people whose grip on reality had been so damaged that reality itself had bent around them. And when they'd vanished into the isolation ward, they hadn't left. They'd become part of the building's structure, its routines, its needs. The hospital was still trying to be a hospital, still calling for staff, still doing rounds, still admitting patients. It just didn't care anymore whether those patients were alive or willing. I was boxing up the files, evidence I could take to someone, anyone, though I didn't know who would believe me, when the lights flickered and went out. My flashlight was on the floor beside me. I grabbed it, but as I clicked it on, I heard the sound that I'd been dreading for weeks. The PA system, crackling to life in the sub-level corridor. A crackled still that same professional female tone, but with something off about it now. Like multiple voices speaking in near unison, creating a subtle echo. Code Blue in Ward C, Isolation Room 4. Immediate medical response required. Corman Ortiz, patient is unresponsive. You can save him this tithe for me. My blood turned to ice. This time, it was talking about Afghanistan, the Marine I'd lost, the one who'd bled out while I fumbled the tourniquet, the guilt I'd carried for 3 years, the nightmare that still woke me up. The hospital knew. It had learned me, studied me, found the exact words to pull at the part of me that was still a corpsman, still desperate to fix the things I'd failed at. I stood, my legs shaky, the flashlight beam wavering. Every instinct screamed at me to run upstairs, to get to Ward C, to try again, to prove I wasn't a failure. And then from somewhere above, from the direction of the psychiatric wing, I heard a new sound. Pounding on a door, fists against metal, desperate and rhythmic, and a voice, raw and familiar. Caleb, help! I'm stuck in here, man! They locked me in! Please, you have to open the door. Brandon's voice coming from behind the red X door. My radio, clipped to my belt, crackled. Mallory's voice, faint and distorted. Ortiz, whatever you're hearing, ignore it. Stay where you are. That's not real. None of it's real. But it sounded real. The pounding, the voice, the sheer terror in Brandon's tone as he screamed my name. And the PA announcement repeating, Code Blue, Ward C, patient status critical. Corman Ortiz, immediate response required. You have 2 minutes to prevent expiration. A countdown, a timer. Just like in a real emergency. I stood at the junction of 2 impossible choices. I could run to Ward C, to Isolation Room 4, and try to save a patient who didn't exist, who might be the thing that had taken Brandon, who might be my own guilt given voice and form. Or I could run to the psychiatric wing and open the red X door, break the most explicit rule, try to save Brandon, or whatever was using his voice. Or I could trust Mallory, trust the rules, and do nothing while 2 people I could potentially save died. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the radio. Mallory, I hear Brandon. He's in the red door room. He's calling for help. It's not him. Mallory's voice was firm. Brandon is gone. That's the hospital using his voice. If you open that door, you join him. Do you understand? You join him. But what if? There is no what if. Mallory's voice rose. This is what it does. It finds what you care about, what you failed at, and it uses that to get you to break the rules. Every single person we've lost fell for it. Don't be next. The PA was counting down. 90 seconds to cardiac arrest. Corman Ortiz, you are the only responder. This patient's life is in your hands. Brandon's voice. Please, Caleb, I can't breathe. The door's stuck. Just throw the bolt, man, please. I was standing at the base of the stairwell, my flashlight pointed up into the darkness, every muscle tense to run toward one disaster or the other. And then I remembered Nurse Miller's words. It needs us to see, to acknowledge, to follow its rules. The hospital was testing me. It had tested Brandon with curiosity and skepticism, and he'd failed. Now it was testing me with guilt and duty. If I ran to either location, I was accepting its premise, that I could save someone that someone needed, saving that I had the power to fix this. But there was no patient in Ward C, and Brandon was already gone. I forced myself to stop moving. To stand still at the base of those stairs, my flashlight beamed steady on the steps above. "No," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the concrete tunnel. The pounding intensified. Brandon's voice broke into sobs. "Please, please, don't leave me here. Caleb, please, I'm your partner. Don't let me die in here." The PA continued its countdown. 60 seconds. Patient entering cardiac arrest. Corman Ortiz. Respond is... I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, every fiber of my being screaming at me to move. "No," I said again louder. "I'm not a corpsman here. I'm a guard. This isn't my hospital. These aren't my patients." 30 seconds. Brandon's voice changed, becoming layered, multiple voices speaking as one. "You left us. You left me. You let him die." "I'm not playing this game," I said, my voice breaking. 15 seconds. 10. The PA went silent mid-countdown. Brandon's voice cut off in the middle of a scream. The silence that followed was absolute. No hum of generators, no drip of pipes, no wind through broken windows. Just emptiness, vast and listening. Then so quietly I almost missed it, the PA whispered, "Asset Ortiz. Non-compliant. Status updated. Observation continuing." The lights flickered back on. The normal sounds of the building resumed, the hum of electronics, the distant clank of old pipes. I stood at the base of the stairs for a long time, my legs too weak to climb, my hands still shaking. I'd passed the test. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wasn't over. The hospital had called me an asset and updated my status. It was cataloging me, classifying me, deciding what I was in its system. And I didn't know if what I'd just done had saved me or marked me for something worse. The week after I refused to respond to the hospital's test, things changed. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a fever building toward a crisis. The building's behavior became more insistent, more invasive, more personal. The ward assignment boards, those dusty whiteboards in the nursing stations, began updating themselves. I'd check them on one round and find them blank or marked with old, faded names from years past. An hour later, they'd show fresh writing. On duty, Ortiz. Observer, provisional. Admitted Stevens. Ward B, Hale, isolation. 4 Garcia. Ward C, Kimball, East Wing. All the guards who'd gone missing are now listed as patients. The surgical wing began showing signs of recent use. On Monday, I found an operating theater with instruments laid out on trays as if for a procedure. Scalpels, retractors, clamps, all arranged in proper order despite being covered in years of rust. By Tuesday, the rust was gone, the instruments gleaming as if freshly autoclaved. On Wednesday, I found fresh surgical drapes, folded on a table, the paper wrappers still crisp. The hospital was preparing for something. In the dark windows of patient rooms, I started seeing my own reflection wearing different uniforms. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of myself in Navy Corpsman blues, the uniform I'd worn in Afghanistan. Other times I wore nurse's scrubs or an old Army Medical Corps dress uniform I'd never owned. My face was always the same, but the eyes were wrong, flat and empty, looking at nothing. The PA announcements became more frequent and more targeted. They knew my schedule now, my routes, my habits. They'd announce staff meetings in rooms I was about to enter, or call for Corpsman Ortiz to report to whichever wing I was farthest from, as if trying to herd me somewhere specific. And through it all, I heard the gurney wheels. Every round, every hour, somewhere behind me in the corridors. I followed Rule 7 religiously, never looking back twice, always walking faster. But the sound was growing louder, following me for longer distances, coming louder. On a Thursday in early December, as I reviewed old logbooks looking for patterns, I found an entry from 2008 written in Mallory's handwriting. 0015 code black announced. Followed protocol. Duration, 47 minutes. Visual confirmation of 8 to 12 entities conducting rounds. Did not engage. Survival confirms protocol efficacy. Code Black. The event Mallory had warned me about was when the hospital did its own rounds. I'd been dreading it, wondering when it would happen, knowing that it was inevitable. It came 2 nights later. The shift had been quiet until then. I'd done my rounds, logged the time, checked the cameras. Everything was routine, or as routine as anything got at Fort Halcyon. At 1:45 a.m., I was in the security office writing up my notes when the temperature dropped. I don't mean it got chilly, I mean the temperature plummeted, my breath misting instantly, frost forming on the inside of the window in crystalline patterns. The monitors all flickered and went dark for 3 seconds. When they came back on, the timestamp had jumped ahead by exactly 1 minute, as if that minute had been removed from existence. And then the PA system activated with a sound I'd never heard before. Not the single tone of a normal announcement, but a chord. Multiple tones overlapping like an old hospital's pneumatic tube system and electric bell combined. The voice that followed was different too. Not the calm female announcer, but something flatter, more artificial. Like an early text-to-speech program. Attention all staff. Code Black. All personnel report to assigned beds and remain still until Code Black is lifted. This is not a drill. Code Black. Duration, estimated 45 minutes. The lights in the corridor outside the office shifted to a deep red emergency lighting I'd never seen activate before. I remembered Mallory's rule. Lie down wherever you are, close your eyes, and don't move. My rational mind fought it. I wanted to watch the monitors, to see what was happening, to maintain some control over the situation. But I forced myself to follow the protocol. I moved away from the desk, lay down on the floor of the office, and closed my eyes. The cold intensified. I could feel it seeping up through the linoleum, through my clothes, into my bones. Then the sounds began. Gurney wheels, dozens of them moving through corridors in synchronized patterns. Not the tentative following sound I'd heard before, but purposeful movement, like actual medical staff conducting rounds. Footsteps, multiple sets moving with the wheels, some heavy, some light, some that sounded wrong. Too many impacts or impacts in the wrong rhythm, as if whatever was walking didn't have a standard number of legs. Doors opening and closing. I heard them throughout the building. The heavy clunk of ward doors, the lighter click of patient room doors, the squeal of hinges that hadn't moved in years. And voices. Quiet murmurs like nurses checking charts and documents. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was right. Professional, clinical, routine. Every so often a voice would rise slightly. Vitals stable. Medication administered. Patient non-responsive. The sounds moved through the entire complex. I heard them pass by the office door, gurney wheels squeaking, footsteps, that constant murmuring. I kept my eyes clenched shut, my hands flat on the floor, forcing myself not to move, even though every instinct screamed to look, to see what was out there. Something entered the office. I felt the air displacement, heard the soft sound of movement. Whatever it was circled me slowly, 1 rotation, 2, 3. I felt pressure on my chest, light as a hand checking for breathing. Something that might have been fingers touched my wrist, feeling for a pulse. A voice directly above me, that same flat artificial tone from the PA. Unassigned asset located, no bed designation, no treatment plan, status observer. Another voice, this one with a slight hiss like an old recording. Provisional designation, not yet admitted. Continue monitoring. The pressure lifted. The presence moved away, wheels squeaking as it left the office. But it wasn't over. For the next 40 minutes, I lay on that floor, eyes closed, listening to the hospital conduct rounds through every wing, every corridor, every room. I heard doors open that had been chained shut. I heard elevators moving that had no power. I heard voices calling patient names, heard responses from rooms that should be empty. At one point, I heard a sound I recognized. Brandon's voice, distant and hollow, responding to some question I couldn't hear. He sounded calm, medicated, compliant, no longer fighting or afraid, just admitted. Time stretched. I lost track of minutes, focusing only on keeping still, on breathing slowly, on following the rule. Finally, the PA chimed. Again. Code Black lifted. All staff resume normal duties. All patients remain in assigned beds. The red lights returned to normal. The temperature began to rise. The sounds of gurneys and footsteps faded, not moving away but simply ceasing, as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. I waited another 5 minutes before I opened my eyes. The office was exactly as it had been. The monitors showed empty corridors, normal camera feeds. My logbook sat on the desk, undisturbed. But the timestamp on the monitors showed that 47 minutes had passed, exactly matching the duration from Mallory's old log entry. I got up on shaking legs and checked the building. Every door that had been opened during Code Black was now closed and locked again. The gurneys I'd heard were back in their positions, wheels rusted. The operating theater I'd been watching was dark and undisturbed. But in Ward C on the patient board, my name had been moved. On duty. Blank admitted. Stevens, Ward B Hale, isolation. 4 Garcia, Ward C Kimball, East Wing. Provisional Ortiz under observation. I stared at that word. Provisional. I'd survived Code Black. I'd followed the protocol, but the hospital hadn't classified me as staff anymore. I was provisional, pending, waiting for final determination. I radioed Mallory immediately. It was nearly 3 a.m., but he answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. I survived Code Black, I said. I know, I've been watching the timestamps. His voice was tense. You followed protocol? Yes, but Mallory, it changed my status. I'm listed as provisional now. What does that mean? The pause that followed was too long. It means you're between categories, he said finally. Not staff, not patient, not observer. You're in transition. The hospital is deciding what you are. How do I change that? How do I get back to observer status? I don't know. He sounded older than I'd ever heard him. Nobody's been in provisional status before. Everyone else either stayed in observer status or got admitted. You're something new. My stomach turned to ice. What do I do? Keep following the rules. Don't give it a reason to reclassify you. And Ortiz? If your status changes to admitted, you get out immediately. Don't finish your shift. Don't log out. Just run. He ended the transmission. I spent the rest of that shift in the office watching the monitors, my hand never far from my car keys. The hospital was quiet, patient, waiting to see what I would become. I should have quit immediately. I should have walked out after Code Black, driven away, and never looked back. Mallory had made it clear that my continued presence was a risk, that the hospital was actively processing me, deciding whether I belonged on the staff roster or the patient registry. But I stayed. I told myself it was because I needed the money, because quitting would look bad on my record, because I was close to some kind of understanding. After all, I'd help the next person. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. I wasn't sure I could leave. The week after Code Black felt like living in a holding pattern. My shifts continued, the rounds remained the same, and the hospital's behavior was almost watchful. The PA announcements stopped. The gurney sounds became less frequent. Even the ward board stopped updating. It felt like the hospital was waiting for me to make a choice. On a Monday morning, as I was finishing my shift and preparing to leave, Mallory arrived early again. He looked different, more tired, older, but also resolved, as if he'd made a difficult decision. I talked to Mrs. Chen, he said without preamble. Put in for your transfer. You're being reassigned to a warehouse security gig in Virginia. Starts next month. Pays the same normal hours, no complications. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a strange resistance, like a rubber band pulling me back toward the hospital. "You're sure that's necessary?" I heard myself say. Mallory's eyes narrowed. "You're asking if it's necessary?" "Ortiz, you're in provisional status. The building has been cataloging you for weeks. If you stay much longer, you won't be able to tell the difference between following the rules and being processed by them." He was right. I knew he was right. But the hospital had become familiar in a way that was hard to explain. Its rhythms, its sounds, even its dangers had become a kind of routine. The outside world felt distant and unreal compared to the immediate visceral reality of Fort Halcyon. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think. Just go." Mallory's voice hardened. "I've seen what happens when people stay too long. They start defending the place, making excuses for it. They start to identify with it. That's when it has you." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I accepted the transfer. My last shift at Fort Halcyon was on a Friday, 3 weeks after Code Black. I arrived at the usual time, went through the usual routines, and tried to treat it like any other night. But the hospital knew. During my 10 p.m. rounds, I found changes I hadn't seen before. In the chapel, someone had left a handwritten note on the altar on hospital stationery. "Thank you for your service. We hope your stay was educational." The guard office had been cleaned. Not by any human hand. I'd been the last one in it. But the dust had been wiped away. The old coffee maker polished, the logbook stacked neatly. It looked like someone preparing a space for the next occupant. And in WSRD C on the patient board, my status had changed one final time. "On duty," blank admitted. Stevens, Ward B. Hale, isolation. 4 Garcia, Ward C. Kimball, East Wing former staff. Ortiz, observer, temp. Transferred the hospital had processed. My departure. Filed me away. Updated its records. I stood in front of that board for a long time, staring at my name in the former staff section. It felt like reading my own epitaph. At 2 a.m., as I was doing my final rounds, the PA system activated one last time. But instead of the artificial voice or the calm announcer, I heard something different. A crackling recording, old and distorted, that sounded like dozens of voices speaking in soft unison. "Goodbye, Observer Ortiz. Your compliance has been noted. Your service is appreciated. May your external assignment proceed without incident." Then silence. I completed my final log entry at 8 a.m., signed out and left the keys and radio on the desk. Taped beside them was the laminated card, still showing the original 7 rules I'd been given, but someone had added a 9th rule in neat handwriting that wasn't mine. Rule 9. If the hospital starts calling you staff instead of visitor, quit before the end of the week. I left it there for whoever came next. As I walked out through the lobby, past the empty reception desk and darkened corridors, I felt the building watching me leave. Not malevolent exactly, just aware, noting my departure the way a system notes a user logging off. Outside, the December sun was rising over the flat training grounds, painting the sky in pale oranges and grays. I got in my car, started the engine, and looked back at Fort Halcyon one last time. Every window on the east wing was lit from within, a warm yellow glow that suggested life, activity, a fully staffed facility conducting morning rounds. Then, as I watched, the lights went out in sequence, floor by floor, window by window, until the building was dark again. Empty, abandoned, waiting for night. I drove away and didn't look back again. The transfer to Virginia was supposed to fix things. New job, new city, normal security work at a warehouse complex that stored medical supplies. No hospitals, no overnight shifts, no rules beyond the standard operating procedures. But I couldn't shake Fort Halcyon. I started at every overhead announcement in public spaces, airports, malls, office buildings. My heart would race until I confirmed it was just routine information, not someone calling my rank or name. Hospital corridors made my skin crawl. I avoided them whenever possible, took stairs instead of elevator routes that passed medical floors, and crossed the street to avoid walking past clinic entrances. And in reflective surfaces, store windows, car mirrors, polished floors, I sometimes saw things that weren't there. Glimpses of fluorescent-lit hallways behind me instead of the actual street. Shadows in the shape of gurneys, my own reflection wearing scrubs or a corpsman's uniform. The therapist I started seeing diagnosed it as PTSD, recommended exposure therapy and medication. I didn't tell her the whole story. How do you explain that you're not haunted by memories but by a building that might still be watching you, updating your file, tracking your status? I kept the laminated card, I don't know why. Maybe as proof, maybe as a reminder, maybe as insurance. I stored it in a drawer with other mementos from my military service, dog tags, unit patches, a faded photo of my medical unit. Sometimes, late at night, I'd take it out and read the rules again, checking to see if any had changed. They hadn't. But on the back of the card, in handwriting I didn't recognize, and that hadn't been there when I'd left. A single line had appeared. Status: observation continuing. Remote. I told myself it was my imagination, that I'd written it myself during a half-asleep moment and forgotten. That stress was making me see things. But I knew better. Fort Halcyon had let me leave physically, but it had updated my status, and updates meant the system was still tracking me, still cataloging me, still deciding what category I ultimately belonged in. I was out, but I wasn't free. And somewhere, in an abandoned hospital complex on the edge of a decommissioned military base, my name remained on a whiteboard in Ward C, filed under former staff, with a status that might change at any time. The hospital was patient. It had years of practice. It could wait for me to slip, to break a rule, to end up back in its system, as a visitor, as a contractor, or as something else. I just had to make sure I never gave it that chance. I just had to make sure I never went back. 4 months after I left Fort Halcyon on a cold February evening, a young woman named Jenna Park drove through the outer gate for her first shift as the facility's new night security guard. She was 26, recently graduated from a private security training program, and eager to prove herself. The Fort Halcyon contract was a step up from her previous work at shopping mall security. Better pay, independent assignments, real responsibility. She'd specifically requested solo shifts, wanting to demonstrate she could handle the isolation and autonomy. Sergeant Mallory met her at the site office in town for the preliminary briefing. He looked older than his photo on the company website, more worn down, but his handshake was firm and his instructions clear. "The job is straightforward," he told her as they drove to the hospital. "Keep vandals out, log hourly rounds, report anything unusual. The building's scheduled for demolition next year, so we're mainly preventing liability issues." "Any problems with break-ins?" Jenna asked, reviewing the site map on her tablet. "Some. Urban explorers, occasional homeless individuals looking for shelter. The fence usually keeps them out." He paused. "The building itself has some quirks. Old wiring, unreliable power in some sections. Don't be surprised if you hear strange sounds. Wind through broken windows, pipes settling, that sort of thing." "I've worked overnight at empty buildings before," Jenna said confidently. "I know old structures have their own noises." Mallory glanced at her but said nothing. They arrived at Fort Halcyon just before dusk. Jenna studied the sprawling complex through the windshield. The darkened windows, the crumbling facade, the fence line with its intermittent floodlights. It looked exactly like every other abandoned institutional building she'd seen. "Creepy," she said with a slight smile. "Perfect for TikTok. Is it actually haunted or just supposedly haunted? It's a building, Mallory said flatly. Concrete and steel. What you make of it is up to you. Inside, he showed her the security office, the camera monitors, the generator controls. He walked her through the in-round route, the main corridors, the exterior doors, the wings she needed to check. He spoke quickly, efficiently, as if trying to get through the briefing and leave before something happened. As they returned to the office, he opened the desk drawer and pulled out a laminated card. The same card I'd received, now showing 9 rules instead of the original 7. He slid it across the desk toward Jenna. She picked it up, read the header, Fort Halcyon, Night Security Protocol, unofficial, and laughed. Oh, this is great. You guys really lean into the haunted hospital thing, huh? Let me guess, this is hazing for new hires? Mallory's expression didn't change. It's protocol. I recommend you follow it. Jenna read through the rules, her smile fading slightly as she got to the more specific ones. Red X doors, gurney wheels. This is pretty elaborate for a joke. It's not a joke. Something in his tone made her look up. Mallory met her eyes, and for a moment she saw how tired he was, how old, how many nights he'd spent in this building or dealing with its consequences. Look, he said quietly. I've been on this contract for 6 years. I've seen a lot of people come through here. The ones who follow the protocols do fine. The ones who don't have problems. What kind of problems? Read the rules. Follow them. That's all you need to know. He stood, gathering his things. Your shift starts at 2000 hours tomorrow. Tonight's just orientation, so I recommend you leave before dark. Get familiar with the office, review the logs, but don't stay past sunset until you're officially on shift. Why not? He didn't answer directly. The hospital is different at night, just trust me on this. After he left, Jenna sat alone in the office, the laminated card in her hands. Part of her wanted to take it seriously. Mallory had seemed genuinely concerned, and the detail in the rules suggested they were based on something more than tradition. But the rational part of her, the part that had gotten her through security training and 3 years of uneventful mall work, saw it as superstition. Every old building had its legends, its ghost, stories, its unofficial rules that were really just experienced guards trying to haze the newbies. She pocketed the card without reading it carefully and spent the next hour reviewing the logbooks. The entries were routine mostly, but every few pages she found oddities. 2350 overhead announcement heard, did not respond, no issues. 0130 east wing lights on, logged as electrical fault, did not investigate. 0215 Cohen to Black protocol followed, duration 43 minutes, no interaction. The handwriting varied, but the tone was always the same. Controlled, brief, deliberately undetailed. She found my entries from November in detail. My handwriting was tighter, more tense, the logs growing shorter as the weeks progressed. My final entry was just 08 Juars, end of shift. C. Ortiz, final log, facility transferred to next assigned guard, no elaboration, no farewell, just a timestamp and a signature. Jenna checked her watch. Nearly 6 p.m., the winter sun already setting beyond the training grounds. Malwa's Ori had said to leave before dark, but she wanted to walk through the building once, get a feel for it in person rather than just on paper. She took one of the radio handhelds and her flashlight and started a quick circuit of the main floor. The lobby was dim in the fading light, shadows pooling in corners. Her footsteps echoed on the linoleum. She walked the main corridor, checking doors, noting which areas felt stable and which had visible water damage or structural concerns. The surgery wing was unsettling. All those dark operating theaters, the old equipment, the sense of frozen time. But she'd seen worse. Abandoned buildings always felt eerie when you were alone. She checked the administrative wing, found the old chapel, noted the locations of the stairwells. Everything matched the maps Mallory had provided. By the time she returned to the office, it was fully dark outside. The monitors showed grainy feeds of empty corridors, motion-activated cameras flicking on and off as she reviewed them. She should leave. That's what Mallory had recommended. But she was here. The building was secure, and she wanted to prove to herself and to her new supervisor that she wasn't intimidated by atmosphere and folklore. She sat down at the desk, pulled out her phone, and started scrolling through social media, half watching the monitors. At 11:45 p.m., as she was reading an article about abandoned military sites and thinking about whether Fort Halcyon would make a good photo series, the PA system crackled to life. She looked up, startled. The sound was sharp in the quiet office, a burst of static followed by a clearing tone, then a voice, female, calm, professional. "Officer Park, please report to the main nurses station in Ward C. Orientation will begin shortly." Jenna frowned. Officer Park? Nobody called security guards officers. That was police terminology. And orientation? At midnight? She glanced at the PA control board, on the wall. It was dark, unpowered, just as Mallory had said. The system was supposed to be offline, but she definitely heard the announcement. Clear as day, using her name, asking her to report to Ward C. She stood, uncertain. Was this part of the hazing? Was Mallory testing her somehow, watching to see if she'd follow the rules or break them immediately? She reached for the laminated card in her pocket, then stopped. She'd barely read it. Something about announcements after a certain time, but she couldn't remember the specific rule. The PA crackled again. "Officer Park, your presence is required in Ward C. Please proceed immediately. Orientation is mandatory for all new staff." New staff, not new guard. Staff. Curiosity and a desire to prove herself pushed Jenna toward the office door. If someone was squatting in the building and messing with her, she needed to confront them, establish authority, make it clear this facility was secured. She picked up her flashlight and radio and stepped into the corridor. Behind her, unseen on the office desk, the laminated card lay where she'd left it. Rule 1 clearly visible under the desk lamp. Do not acknowledge any overhead announcement that uses your rank or full name after 2340. We don't page individuals at night. The security system monitor flickered, and a new line of text appeared in the status display, updating automatically as if someone had typed it from a remote terminal. Staff status update, Ortiz, observer, off-site. Monitoring continues, Hale, admitted. Ward assignment, permanent Park. J from provisional night staff. Orientation in progress. In the darkness of Ward C, at the end of a long corridor lined with empty patient rooms, the main nurses' station stood silent and dark. But as Jenna Park approached, following the sound of her own footsteps and the beam of her flashlight, overhead lights began flickering on in sequence. One by one, panel by panel, creating a path of illumination that led deeper into the ward, guiding her forward like runway lights bringing in an aircraft. At the nurses' station, a clipboard sat on the counter, positioned as if someone had just placed it there. The top sheet was a standard intake form, hospital letterhead still visible despite the years. At the top of the form, in fresh black ink, a name had been written. Park, Jenna, new hire orientation. And somewhere in the psychiatric wing, beyond the red X door in isolation room 4, the sound of gurney wheels began to roll. Slow, methodical, purposeful. The hospital was preparing a bed for its newest employee, just in case she didn't read the rules in time.